My little girl started whispering warnings about her father the way some children talk about shadows, softly, like she was afraid the darkness might hear her. I brushed it off as imagination, the way parents sometimes do. But the night I finally followed her trembling finger, I realized she hadn't been afraid of the dark at all, she'd been afraid of what was standing in it. The story unfolds in a small, quiet town where winters feel too long and the nights settle heavy on the house. The narrator, a young mother named Mariam, is doing her best to raise 6-year-old Hiba while navigating the slow unraveling of her marriage to her husband, Farhan, a man who once felt warm, but now moves through the home like a silent draft. Life is still ordinary for Mariam: school lunches, evening baths, the usual worries. But lately, Hiba has been waking at night, clutching her mother's shirt, whispering strange things about her father. Mariam doesn't want to believe her, until the warnings begin to carve their way into the quiet spaces of her home. The first time she woke me, the house was so still I could hear the hum of the old ceiling fan turning above us, slow, tired, the way a memory turns. Hiba's little hand tugged at my sleeve, soft at first, then desperate. "Mama," she whispered, her breath warm against my cheek, "don't let Baba come near my room." For a moment, I didn't move. I just stared at her silhouette, small, shaking, outlined by the thin strip of moonlight leaking through the curtains. Children say strange things at night. But there was something in her voice, something that felt older than 6 years. I lifted her into my arms, her legs curling around me like she was trying to disappear into my skin. The floorboards creaked under our weight, soft, like they didn't want to wake the rest of the house. The clock read 2:17 a.m. That hour when everything feels heavier, when the walls seem closer, when even a whisper feels like it might break something open. I carried her back toward my bed, feeling the cold draft that always slipped under the hallway door at night. It brushed my ankles, sharp and thin, like a warning I couldn't quite read. "Hiba, sweetheart," I said gently, "you had a nightmare. That's all." But she shook her head before I even finished the sentence. "No, Mama, it wasn't a dream." I didn't know what to do with that. With the way she said it, careful, afraid, like she was telling me something she wasn't supposed to. Farhan had been different lately. Coming home late. Speaking less. Moving through the house like his footsteps didn't belong to him. He smelled of cold air now, not cigarettes or cologne, just cold. Like he'd been standing outside too long, listening to something I couldn't hear. Maybe that's why her words clung to me. Maybe that's why the silence afterward felt heavier than usual. I tucked her beside me under the blanket, brushing her hair away from her forehead. She closed her eyes, but her lashes kept trembling. "Nothing is wrong," I whispered. Even though I wasn't sure. When Farhan came home the next night, the house reacted before I did. The air shifted. The refrigerator hummed louder. The curtains lifted from a draft I didn't feel. Hiba, who had been coloring at the dining table, froze with her crayon halfway across the page. She didn't even look up, she didn't need to. She just whispered, so softly I almost missed it, "He's here." I told myself she was just on edge. Children sense tension before adults do. They watch the way we avoid looking at each other, the way our shoulders tighten for no reason. Farhan didn't say much that evening. Just placed his keys on the counter, removed his shoes mechanically, and walked past us with a distant nod. His eyes didn't quite settle on anything, not the lamp, not the floor, not even on me. And when he leaned down to touch Hiba's head, a simple father's gesture, she flinched. Not dramatically. Not enough for him to notice. But enough for me to feel it run through me like a thin electric wire. "Everything okay?" I asked him. He looked up, startled, like he'd forgotten I was in the room. "Yeah," he said. "Just tired." The words were normal. But something underneath them wasn't. After he went upstairs, Hiba came to my side, her small fingers curling around mine. "Mama," she whispered again, "please don't let him come near my room." Her voice cracked on the last word. And I felt something inside me crack with it. I waited until she fell asleep that night before going to check on Farhan. The hallway was dim, only a spill of light coming from the bathroom door he'd forgotten to fully close. His shadow stretched long across the floor, too long, somehow, and my heart stuttered when I realized he was standing perfectly still at the far end of the hall, facing Hiba's door. His hands were at his sides. His posture loose, almost relaxed. But there was something unnatural about it, the way he didn't seem to notice anything, the dripping faucet, the blinking nightlight, my presence just a few feet away. "Farhan?" I whispered. He didn't turn. I stepped closer, my breath caught somewhere high in my chest. "Farhan, what are you doing?" Slowly, he lifted his head, not turning it, just raising it, as if listening to something above him. His shoulders rose with a long inhale. Then he blinked, once. And it was like he woke up. "Oh," he murmured, rubbing his face, "did I wake you?" "You were standing here," I said, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. He looked at the door like it surprised him. "I don't remember," he whispered. "I must have just wandered." He tried to smile. But it didn't reach his eyes. A cold wave crawled up my spine, slow and certain. My daughter wasn't imagining things. Not all of them. Later, after he finally went to bed, I sat beside Hiba with my hand resting on her back. Her breathing was soft and uneven, like a child trying to pretend she was fully asleep. I stared at the door, at the thin line of darkness beneath it, and felt the house settling around us. Each creak felt deliberate. Each shadow seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. When I leaned down to kiss her forehead, she stirred just enough to whisper into the pillow. "Mama, he doesn't look like Baba at night." Her words slipped into the darkness like a thread being pulled. And I suddenly realized. I wasn't sure what I would see the next time I opened that hallway door. There's a certain sound a house makes when someone walks through it. Not the footsteps, those are easy. But the shift in the air, the faint tremble in the walls, the way silence changes shape without asking. Hiba felt it before anyone else. Some nights, she would stop mid-play, mid-laugh, mid-breath, her little body going still as stone. Her chin lifted, her eyes widened, and she whispered, "He's coming." Not in fear of a stranger, but of her own father's steps in the hallway. And every time she said it, something cold pressed against the back of my neck. It started subtly, like most things in a house where people try not to disturb each other. A quiet dinner. A soft scraping of chairs. Farhan chewing slower than usual, thinking about something he wouldn't say. Hiba sat beside me, her small fingers tapping the rim of her plate. Tap, tap, tap. A rhythm she did only when she felt unsafe. When Farhan stood to take his plate to the sink, she froze. Not dramatically. Not enough for him to see. But enough for me to feel her whole body lean toward me, as if she wanted to slip behind my arm and disappear. Later, when he walked down the hallway to his room, his footsteps made that hollow sound, the one that travels beneath doors. The floorboards carried it like a message. They creaked softly, but with memory, like they recognized his steps and didn't like them anymore. That's when Hiba whispered, "He's coming." I tried to smile, to hush her fear, but the truth is, I didn't feel like smiling. Not with the way Farhan stood in the dark corner near the staircase earlier, staring at nothing until I called his name twice. There was something about the dark in this house now. Something I hadn't noticed before Hiba pointed it out. One afternoon, sunlight was slipping through the living room window in long, tired stripes. Hiba was on the carpet, coloring. She hummed quietly, her legs folded beneath her, the picture of a peaceful child. Then Farhan stepped into the hallway. Just the soft sound of his foot touching the floor. Hiba's crayon slipped. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She simply went still, like someone pressed pause on her whole body. Her eyes lifted, wide, cautious, measuring. Not looking at her father. Looking through him. as if trying to see what stood behind him. Farhan knelt beside her, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "What are you drawing, Hiba?" She flinched before his hand even touched her head. He froze. So did I. "What's wrong with her?" he asked, glancing at me, not angry, but unsettled in a way he didn't know how to hide. "She's just tired," I murmured, even though I knew that wasn't true. He tried again, slower this time, his hand trembling a little. But Hiba scooted back, hugging her knees to her chest. "Did I do something?" His voice cracked. That's what hurt me, the crack, small but real. "No," I whispered. But my heart didn't believe it. Something in this house, something in these walls, had changed the way my child looked at her own father. That night, after tucking Hiba into my bed, because she refused to sleep in her own, I stepped out into the hallway for just a moment of quiet. The lights were dim. Soft yellow circles on the floor. The kind that make shadows look longer than they should. Farhan stood near the staircase again. Same spot. Same unnatural stillness. His eyes weren't open all the way, just enough to see the sliver of white beneath his lids. His chin tilted upward, like he was listening to something above him. Something I couldn't hear. "Farhan?" I whispered. He didn't move. The air around him felt wrong, heavy, like a blanket someone had forgotten to shake out. I stepped closer, my fingers brushing the wall for balance. His voice came out low, almost like he wasn't speaking to me at all. "It's quiet tonight." I swallowed. "What is?" "The house," he murmured. "It listens." A chill threaded through my spine, slow and deliberate. When I touched his arm, he blinked, fast, confused, as if waking from a dream he couldn't remember. "Mariam?" he asked. "What am I doing here?" I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "You were just thinking." He nodded slowly, looking down the hallway, toward the room where Hiba no longer slept. "Why is she afraid of me?" he whispered, but not to me. To himself. And for the first time, I didn't know how to answer. Later, I slipped back into the bedroom, the moonlight resting softly on Hiba's face. She was curled on her side, one hand clutching the edge of my pillow, as if she feared someone might pull it away. I sat beside her, brushing a curl from her forehead. Her breathing steadied. Her body relaxed. But the hallway remained behind me, silent, stretched, waiting. As I switched off the lamp, Hiba's voice rose from the darkness, fragile as a thread. "Mama, does Baba still stand in the dark?" My heart paused. "I saw him again," she whispered. "He doesn't blink." Her words settled in the room like dust, soft, quiet, impossible to ignore. And suddenly, the darkness didn't feel like darkness anymore. It felt like it was watching us. Some nights, I woke before the dawn did, not from a sound, but from a feeling. A pull in the air. A shift in the way the darkness rested around the walls. And when my eyes adjusted, I would see him. Farhan. Standing in the hallway. Still as a coat left hanging too long. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at anything. Just drifting between doorways like a shadow trying to remember the shape of the man who once owned it. That was when I realized. The person who shared my bed wasn't always the one walking through the night. During the day, he moved differently. Quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet a tired husband carries. This was thinner, distant, almost hollow. He walked from room to room as though following a map he couldn't see. His fingers would brush along the walls, slow, searching, like he was feeling for seams in the house. Sometimes he paused in the middle of the living room, staring at the rug as if expecting something to rise from beneath it. I wanted to ask him what he was looking for. I wanted to understand the shape of the thoughts he wasn't sharing. But the truth is, I wasn't sure he would know the answer. Hiba watched him the way small animals watch storms, head tilted, breath quiet, body ready to run. And every time he passed by, she tugged a little closer to my side. Once, while she colored at the table, she whispered without looking up. "Mama." Baba's eyes look tired in the daytime, but at night, they look awake. I didn't know what she meant. Not until the night I saw him sleepwalking again. Something he hadn't done since before our marriage settled into routine, before life shaped him into the man I thought I knew. Watching him wander now, barefoot, silent, felt like watching a stranger wearing his skin. It was almost 3 a.m. when I heard the old hinge at the end of the hallway moan softly. Not loud, just enough to tug me from sleep. I pushed the blanket aside and stepped out of bed, the wooden floor cool beneath my feet. The house smelled like night, that faint mix of still air and forgotten corners. Farhan stood by the window, his back turned to me, head slightly bowed. His shoulders rose and fell in slow, uneven breaths. "Farhan?" I whispered. He didn't turn. Didn't flinch. Didn't react at all. I walked closer, careful not to startle him. His lips moved. Small, broken shapes. Whispered names, one after another, names I'd never heard him say before. Arif. Sana. Rahim. Soft, breathy, lost. "Farhan," I said again, my voice trembling now. "Wake up." His head jerked slightly, but he didn't open his eyes. He drifted past me, not walking toward anything, but drifting like something unseen was tugging him forward. And when he reached Hiba's door, he stopped. Just stood there. His hand hovering near the knob. The hallway light flickered once, dimming the edges of his shadow. I swallowed hard. "Come back to bed," I whispered. He didn't move. Not for a long moment. Then, as if on cue, his arm dropped to his side and he walked away, mindless, weightless, disappearing into the dark like a thought that didn't belong to him. The next morning, he sat at the table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had already gone cold. Sunlight lay across his face in soft strips, but he looked untouched by it, distant, as if the light wasn't meant for him anymore. I sat across from him quietly. "Farhan," I began, "do you remember anything from last night?" He blinked slow. Too slow. "What do you mean?" "You were walking in the hallway," I said softly. You were murmuring names." The silence between us thickened. He frowned, rubbing his forehead with the heel of his hand. "Names? What names?" I told him the ones I remembered. He shook his head, confused, almost afraid of his own mind. "I don't know those people, Mariam." "And you were standing near Hiba's room," I added carefully. His breath hitched. "I was?" His voice sounded small. Uncertain. "You don't remember?" "No," he whispered, staring down at his hands like they were guilty of something. I wanted to believe him. But the way he said it, soft, hollow, made something in my chest fold in on itself. Later that evening, I found him again near the staircase. Same corner. Same posture. He didn't see me. Not at first. He was whispering to the shadows, not words, exactly, just low sounds, like someone trying to soothe a crying child. "Farhan?" My voice cracked. He turned slowly, and for a moment. He looked like he didn't recognize me. Just a flicker, a heartbeat of something wrong. Then it was gone. "Mariam," he breathed. "You scared me." But I wasn't sure who he was reassuring, me or himself. That night, I let Hiba fall asleep in my arms. She curled into me, small and warm, her breath soft against my collarbone. The house was quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. This quiet felt aware. Every creak felt intentional. Every shadow leaned just a little too close. As the moonlight spilled across the hallway floor, I heard it, the faint shuffle of feet. Slow, dragging, familiar. I didn't get up. I just held my daughter tighter. "Mama," she whispered sleepily, her voice fragile as loose thread. "Is Baba awake again?" I didn't answer. Because even from the bedroom, I could see it. A tall shape standing outside her door. Not moving. Not knocking. Just waiting. And I no longer knew who, or what, was standing in my hallway. Hiba placed the paper on the dining table the way some people place flowers on a grave, slow, careful, not looking at it for too long. The afternoon light was soft, stretching itself thin across the room, touching the edges of the crayon lines before I even reached for them. Her backpack slid off her shoulder with a small thud. She didn't say a word. And I couldn't explain it, but the house shifted then. As if it recognized what she had brought inside. As if something cold slipped through the doorway behind her, invisible but heavy. I hadn't even turned the paper over yet. But I already felt watched. I waited. Because mothers know when to wait. Hiba stood beside me, her hands tucked against her chest, thumbs pressed so tightly together they had turned white. She kept her eyes on the wall behind me, not the table, not the drawing. The clock ticked on the opposite wall, steady, ordinary, unaware. I finally pulled the paper closer. The crayon marks were rough, uneven. A child's drawing. Except, not really. Not this one. Farhan's silhouette was familiar, his broad shoulders, the little curve of his smile. But his eyes, Hiba had drawn them as empty circles. Hollow. As if nothing lived behind them. Beside him stood something taller. Black. Long arms, almost dragging toward the floor. No face. Just a shape leaning toward him like it whispered secrets only he could hear. I swallowed. But my throat didn't move. "Hiba," I said softly, what is this?" She didn't blink. Didn't breathe. That's the one who tells him things. Her voice was so thin it barely existed. And in that moment, something inside me went still, like a candle flame caught between burning and dying. I reached for her shoulder, but she stepped back. Not from my touch. From the paper. She ran upstairs before I could say another word. I sat alone at the table, staring at the drawing as if it might move. The tall figure felt wrong on the page, too strong, too present, like the crayons hadn't been enough to contain it. A chair creaked in the hallway. I looked up sharply. But it was only the house settling, or so I told myself. I folded the paper once, then again, each crease a little tighter than the last. And I hid it, tucked the drawing deep inside the kitchen drawer where old warranties and takeout menus lived quiet, harmless lives. The drawer closed with a small click. And yet, I felt no safer. When Farhan came home later, he shook the rain off his jacket and smiled the same tired smile he wore after long days at work. But something felt different. Something in the way he lingered near the staircase, glancing at the darker space underneath it as if listening. He called out for Hiba. She didn't answer. He frowned. She's been avoiding me lately. Did I do something? I opened my mouth. The truth pressed against my teeth. But I couldn't let it out. How do you say it out loud? How do you tell a man that his own daughter sees something standing beside him, whispering to him in the dark? So I shook my head. Kids have phases, I murmured. My voice didn't sound like mine. That night, after the dishes were washed and the lights were turned low, I found myself standing in the kitchen again, hand resting on the drawer where the drawing hid. I didn't open it. I just stood there, listening. The house was too quiet. Even the clock seemed afraid to tick. Then, soft footsteps on the upper floor. Not rushed. Not tired. Just a slow, steady pacing. I looked up. Farhan's shadow passed by the stair railing. Then again. And again. He wasn't coming downstairs. He wasn't going anywhere. He was just walking. Searching. I went up slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last. At the top of the stairs, he stood near Hiba's door, his back to me, head tilted slightly, like he was listening for something inside. His hand hovered inches from the doorknob but never touched it. Farhan? He didn't turn. Didn't move. For a moment, I thought he hadn't heard me. Then he whispered a name. A woman's name. Not mine. I felt the cold from earlier settle around me again, quiet, certain, familiar now. Farhan, I said again. What are you doing? He startled. Blinked hard. Looked around as if waking from a dream underwater. I don't remember coming here, he whispered. His hand dropped. His eyes avoided mine. And the space between us felt crowded with something I couldn't see. Later, when the house finally slept, I opened the drawer. The folded paper felt heavier than before. I smoothed it out on the counter, the tall black figure rising again beside my husband's hollow-eyed shape. The crayon strokes looked darker now, almost wet. I traced the edge of the figure with my fingertip. The line was cold. Colder than the paper should have been. I folded it again, slower this time. And as I slid it back into the drawer, I caught my reflection in the oven door. My eyes looked different, wide, searching, uncertain. Almost like I, too, was listening for something. Something standing just out of sight. Something that might already be inside the house. The first sound I heard was the scratching. Soft, deliberate, coming from the far end of the hallway where the old storage room lived. It was too faint to be nails on wood. Too slow to be the wind. I froze under the blankets, the clock glowing faintly 2:43 a.m. Then a thud. Followed by silence. And beneath that silence, a low murmur. Hiba's small hand pressed against mine, trembling. He's talking to it again, she whispered. I didn't move. The house felt heavier now, holding its breath. And I realized I had never heard Farhan's voice like this before, soft, but not for us. I pulled Hiba close, my body taut, listening. The walls around us seemed to shrink, the hallway narrowing into shadow. Farhan had been distant for weeks now. Sleeping poorly, wandering, whispering names no one knew. And now, this. The storage room had once been just a dusty corner, a collection of broken boxes and forgotten furniture. But Farhan insisted it stay locked. His tone wasn't casual, it was sharp, almost urgent. The kind of sharpness that makes you stop breathing, even in the daylight. I held my daughter's hand tighter. She pressed her face to my arm. Her hair smelled faintly of crayons and the schoolyard, but her small body shook. I tried to steady myself with ordinary things, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the soft creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. But the air around the locked door felt different. Thicker. Older. Like it had been waiting for something, or someone, to wake it. I whispered to Hiba. It's just the house. That's all. Nothing more. Even as I said it, my own words sounded hollow. Because the faint murmur had a cadence. Not random. Intentional. Almost alive. I rose from the bed, barefoot, each step careful, the floor cold against my soles. Hiba's hand clutched my sleeve like she was afraid I might disappear. The door loomed ahead, painted white, chipped at the edges, familiar, yet impossible now. I pressed my palm against it. It was cold. Too cold. Scratching again. Closer this time. A soft rhythm that tugged at something deep inside me. I tried the knob. Locked. As if the room had swallowed itself whole. He's in there, Hiba whispered, her voice trembling. Talking to it. I could hear movement inside now. A shift, almost like something brushing against the floor. A low, wet sound, subtle, but it made the hairs on my neck rise. I pressed my ear against the door. Murmurs, fragmented, broken syllables, drifting through the wood. Farhan's voice, low, soft, incomprehensible. And beneath it, something else, a whisper not his. Dark. Familiar. Watching. I pulled back, my heart hammering. Hiba's small fingers dug into my arm. Why does he talk to it?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't know if I could. Because standing here, hearing that low murmur from the other side of the door, I felt the weight of everything Farhan had hidden, and it pressed down on me, slow, relentless, cold. I grabbed the knob again. Pushed, pulled, wiggled. The lock wouldn't budge. Then, something moved inside. A faint scrape. A shadow shifting against the door, impossible in the dark. I staggered back, hand to my mouth. Hiba trembled beside me, whispering again. He's talking to it, it's angry. Angry. The word echoed in my chest, heavier than any thud or murmur. I knew the room had never been just storage. Farhan had changed something there. Something I wasn't supposed to see. I thought of all the whispers, the sleepless nights, the empty eyes in Hiba's drawing. All the times Farhan drifted at night, talking to someone, or something, I couldn't name. And suddenly, the weight of the locked room wasn't just the wood and the dust. It was everything inside it. And everything that had begun to live in our home. I backed away, my fingertips brushing Hiba's cheek. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the faint moonlight through the window. I realized I could force the door open. I could confront whatever was inside. But some doors are not meant to be opened yet. I returned to bed, Hiba tucked close. The room was silent now, or as silent as it could be. The locked storage room waited at the end of the hallway, patient, hidden, alive. I held her against me, listening to the distant, faint hum of something I could not name. Farhan's footsteps upstairs were soft, slow, deliberate. But even in sleep, I felt his presence linger near the locked door, waiting. Hiba whispered again, almost asleep. "Mama, it's still talking." I didn't answer. I didn't dare. The house had grown colder tonight. And I understood, fully, that some shadows weren't meant to be seen yet. Not by me. Not by Hiba. And maybe, not by Farhan himself. The door stood silent, but the sound behind it had only paused. And I knew, with a slow, terrible certainty, it would speak again. The wind had a taste of wet leaves that evening, brushing across the street like it carried secrets from the woods behind our house. I saw her standing there first, a small, bent figure at the edge of her garden, watching me as I returned from the market. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She only waited, as if she had been standing there for years. And maybe she had. When she beckoned me over, her hand was thin and shaking, the skin like old parchment. I didn't know then that her words would unsettle the ground beneath me, the kind of unease that whispers long after the person is gone. The street was quiet except for the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of a car. Hiba was at home, curled under a blanket, her small fingers tracing shapes in the fabric. Her presence should have been comfort. Instead, the thought of Farhan, wandering and whispering at night, made my chest tighten. The woman's eyes, pale and unwavering, held a stillness I couldn't match. "Your husband," she began, slow, careful, "has he seemed different lately?" I hesitated. I wanted to brush it off. Say no. Say it was just the nights, the stress, the work. But I remembered the empty eyes Hiba drew. The whispers in the hallway. The locked room. I'm not sure, I admitted, my voice too small. She nodded, as if she already knew the answer. "You see, some men, they come back with things clinging to them," she said quietly. Her gaze drifted toward the woods, the branches moving against the dimming sky. And not all of it is good. A shiver ran through me. The idea felt impossible. And yet, the seed of dread had been planted. I felt the ground shift beneath me, not earth, but certainty. We walked slowly toward the end of her garden, my heels crunching on dry leaves. She paused, leaning on her cane, eyes never leaving the dark line of trees behind our house. I see him sometimes, she whispered, standing there, in the dark. Watching the woods. Midnight, 1, 2, sometimes later. Her voice was low, almost a song. The way she spoke made it sound like a confession, not a warning. I tried to imagine it, Farhan, my husband, motionless in the shadows, watching something unseen. The image pressed against my chest, heavy and cold. Does he talk to anyone? I asked, careful. She shook her head slowly. No one. Not here. Not to me. But he listens. And some nights. I think he listens too well. I swallowed hard. The words pressed into me like water into a jar, quiet, unrelenting. When had he changed? When had the man I married become someone the night itself seemed to hold its breath for? I wanted to ask her more, but the words stuck. Instead, I nodded, small and tentative, hoping to understand, hoping to deny. But the image of him in the woods stayed with me. Tall, silent, eyes fixed. Whispers trailing behind him, only he could hear. She placed a hand on my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Listen, she said. I've lived here for decades. I know when something clings to a person. And it changes them. Slowly, quietly, until you barely recognize them. I felt the weight of her words settle in my chest. I remembered Hiba's drawing. I remembered the locked room. The whispers at night. Farhan's vacant eyes. The truth I had avoided so carefully now pressed forward. Not superstition. Not imagination. Something had changed him. Something he had brought back. And, do you think it can be removed? I whispered. She looked at me, eyes shadowed, and shook her head. Some things are stubborn, she said. And some men, they don't even know they carry it. I pulled back, suddenly aware of the night pressing in around us. The street lights flickered. The woods loomed dark and waiting behind our house. I imagined Farhan there, moving through the shadows, listening. And I felt a cold certainty, the man in my home was not entirely the man I had married. And whatever clung to him, was patient. I felt Hiba's small hand in my mind, her whispered warnings, her eyes wide and measuring. I wondered, had he always been like this at night? Or had the change started the moment he returned from somewhere we never spoke about? The old woman straightened, leaning on her cane. I've seen enough to know, she said softly. Sometimes it takes a child to notice first. I nodded, too aware of Hiba upstairs, curled into the blanket, listening to the silence of our house. We walked back slowly, the air carrying the faint rustle of leaves and something older, watching. Inside, the hallway seemed longer, darker. Farhan's footsteps had faded into stillness, but I imagined him there, beyond the shadows, beyond understanding. Some men do return with things clinging to them. And I realized, with a slow, sinking certainty, that I was living with one. Hiba's small voice whispered in my mind. He listens too well. And I understood, finally, that I had been avoiding the truth for too long. The change was real. And the night had only just begun. The bedroom was dark, but not empty. Moonlight cut across the floor in thin silver lines, catching the dust in the air. I lay awake, pretending to sleep. Pretending, but listening. Then I saw him. Farhan's eyes were open. Wide. Unblinking. Not the slow flutter of someone waking from a dream. But still. Attentive. Patient. Watching. The rhythm of his breathing slowed, unnaturally, like he was waiting for a signal only he could hear. And when he rose from the bed, silent as a shadow, I realized this night was different. This night would not end in ordinary sleep. I lay still, heart hammering. The floor beneath the door seemed to breathe. Every creak, every groan of the house, was magnified. Hiba was sleeping soundly, curled into her blanket, her small body a fragile promise of innocence. And yet, I feared for her more than myself. Farhan moved with careful precision. No swaying, no hesitation. Each step down the hall measured, exact, as if the floor itself obeyed him. I traced the path with my eyes. His hand brushed the wall lightly, fingers grazing the surface like a reader tracing braille. The hallway light pooled faintly at his feet. The shadows leaned toward him, thin and expectant. My chest pressed against the mattress. I wanted to call out. I wanted to stop him. But fear held me in place. The house felt alive tonight, listening with me. Waiting. I reminded myself, sleepwalking was not new. But this was deliberate. Controlled. Unnatural. I whispered Hiba's name silently, hoping to anchor myself, to remind myself that some part of this night belonged to ordinary life. But even as I watched, I knew ordinary had left the house a long time ago. He stopped at Hiba's door. Hand hovering just above the knob. I held my breath. It felt like the air had thickened. Like the silence had a texture, rough against my skin. I tried to see his face in the dark. The moonlight caught the side of his jaw. But his eyes, they were unreadable. Focused. Waiting. I pressed myself closer to the wall, small and quiet. My toes dug into the carpet. I could feel every pulse of my own heartbeat echoing in the hollow space between us. Then he tilted his head slightly, listening. The room seemed to hold its breath. I heard something low, almost imperceptible. A faint, soft thrum, like a whisper moving just beyond comprehension. He didn't knock. He didn't move the door. But I could feel it, the sense that he expected something to respond. From the other side. From the darkness beyond the door. I realized, slowly, the weight of what I was seeing. This was not sleepwalking. This was waiting. Patient. Intent. I pressed a hand to my mouth, stifling the small gasp that threatened to escape. Hiba stirred faintly in her sleep, murmuring, but did not wake. I exhaled slowly, quietly. My eyes never left him. And then, a faint shift on the other side of the door. Not loud enough to call attention, but enough to make the hairs on my arms stand on end. He leaned slightly, listening, his chest still rising and falling at a pace that felt wrong. I wanted to reach for Hiba. I wanted to shout. I wanted the normal life we used to have back. But I couldn't. I couldn't break the spell of the moment. The door seemed alive. Waiting. And he was listening to it. I traced his movements with my eyes as he shifted his weight. Every muscle controlled. Every step deliberate. I realized then, he wasn't moving toward Hiba's room for a simple purpose. He was expecting a response. Something unseen. Something patient. Something that whispered only to him. My body froze. I could feel the fear pooling in my stomach. Not the ordinary fear of a stranger at the door. Not even the fear of shadows. This was deeper. He reached out, fingers hovering over the knob. Paused. Waited. I couldn't tell if he was listening to her, or to whatever lurked on the other side. The silence stretched, heavy, broken only by the faint hum of night air through the window. I thought of Hiba, alone behind that door, and a cold certainty took root in my chest. I had been ignoring the signs for too long. Whatever clung to Farhan at night. It was patient. And it was waiting. He stepped back finally, retreating silently down the hall. The door remained closed. The presence beyond it waited. I sank to the floor, knees to my chest, feeling the pulse of the house beneath me. Hiba stirred, murmuring a name in her sleep. I dared not move. I dared not speak. Farhan returned to our room eventually, slipping into the bed beside me without a word. His eyes were open just a fraction too long before closing. I held my breath, letting the dark settle around us. The hallway seemed longer now. The locked door heavier. The night patient. And I knew it would return. The waiting, the watching, the unblinking presence. And I didn't know if we were ready for what it would bring. The house exhaled slowly. And I stayed still, listening, waiting, with my daughter's soft breaths against my shoulder. The morning light was weak, filtering through thin curtains, painting the room in soft gray stripes. I hadn't slept. The house still smelled faintly of the night, cold wood, dust, something lingering I couldn't name. Hiba crawled into my lap without a word, her small arms clinging tightly around me. Her hair smelled of yesterday's playground and schoolroom crayons, but her eyes were serious, wary. "Mama," she whispered, barely audible, "Baba is not Baba at night." The words sank slowly, chillingly. I felt my throat tighten. A shiver ran down my spine. And in that quiet morning light, I realized the shadows of last night hadn't left, they were sitting here, beside us. I held her close, letting her small body press against mine. Her voice was soft, almost a secret, yet heavy with meaning. The kitchen smelled of toast and coffee, ordinary smells that did nothing to anchor me. The hallway outside seemed too still, too quiet, like it was listening. Hiba's fingers dug into my sleeve as she whispered, "He talks to someone. Behind him. In the dark." I closed my eyes, trying to make sense of it. The idea of Farhan standing in the hallway, talking to something I couldn't see, made my chest feel hollow. "I see it when the light flickers," she said. A pause. Her small voice trembled. "It wants me next." I pressed my lips together. Breathing slow. Heart pounding. All the signs I had tried to ignore, the locked room, the empty eyes in her drawings, the nights he didn't blink, now converged in her words. I wanted to dismiss it. Tell her it was a dream. Tell myself it was imagination. But the weight of her trust, the seriousness in her eyes, anchored me. This was no longer a phase. No longer a child's fear. Something in our home had changed. And I wasn't sure how to protect either of us. I traced her small hand with mine, feeling the tremor in her fingers. The air felt thick, heavy, as if carrying the residue of last night. "Tell me everything," I whispered, careful, measured. She leaned closer, face pressed to my chest. "He stands there, behind him. Tall. Dark. Only when the hallway light flickers." Her words fell slowly, each one punctuated by a pause that made the room feel colder. I swallowed, listening to her small breaths, trying to focus on ordinary things, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft clink of her cup on the nightstand. But my mind was crowded with images of shadows and eyes, waiting, patient. She hesitated, then whispered, almost as if saying it aloud made it real. "It wants me next." I held her tighter. Her hair brushed against my cheek, warm and familiar, a fragile tether to the ordinary world. The idea of confronting what she described, of acknowledging it, made my throat burn. The house felt smaller, pressing in around us. The hallway beyond her door seemed longer, darker, ready. I realized then that denial was no longer possible. The fear, the warnings, the drawings, they were all true in ways I had been too afraid to see. And yet, the next step, the acknowledgement, felt like stepping into a storm I wasn't prepared for. I kissed her hair, pressing my face to the top of her head, and whispered, "We'll figure it out, together." But inside, I felt the slow, creeping certainty of what we faced. Hiba looked up, eyes wide, searching mine. Mama, he's different. At night. Not the Baba I know. Her words carved through me, splitting the last of my disbelief. All the half-understood warnings, the whispers of the old neighbor, the locked room, they converged into a single, undeniable truth. I tried to steady my breathing, to ground myself with the ordinary. The way the morning sun pooled across the rug. The way her small fingers gripped mine. The way the faint smell of toast should have been comforting. But it wasn't. Not anymore. If I admitted it aloud, if I spoke the truth of what Hiba saw, then I would have to face it. All of it. I could no longer pretend he was simply tired, sleepwalking, distracted. The man who walked the hall at night, listening, standing still, was not entirely Farhan. And whatever presence followed him, whispered to him, patient and unseen, was aware. Waiting. I felt the weight settle in my chest, cold and relentless. I wanted to protect her. But I realized, protecting her meant stepping into the truth I had long avoided. I held her against me, feeling her small heartbeat. The morning light fell in slanted strips, highlighting the dust in the air. She whispered again, almost sleepily. Mama, it wants me next. I didn't answer. I didn't dare. The hallway outside her door seemed longer, darker, holding its breath. I pressed a hand over my mouth, listening to the silence, the house waiting. I knew now this was no imagination, no childish fear. The presence was real. The threat was patient. And the man I loved, the man I thought I knew, was no longer entirely him at night. I closed my eyes, holding Hiba tighter, letting the quiet press around us. The day had begun, but the shadows lingered. And I understood that the night was still watching, still waiting, and we were not yet safe. The storm hit suddenly, like the sky had ripped open. Rain pounded the roof, rolling across the windows in heavy sheets. The house groaned, the floorboards shivering beneath our feet. Then the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the hall. For a moment, silence answered the storm. And then, the door. The old storage room, the one Farhan had insisted on locking, creaked. Slowly. As if something unseen had turned the knob itself. I felt my chest tighten, hands trembling. Hiba pressed against me, small and cold. She whispered, barely audible, "It's near him again." And I realized, the night wasn't waiting anymore. It was moving. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer, its beam cutting a narrow path through the storm-dark house. Hiba clung to my side, fingers digging into my sleeve. The hallway smelled of rain and damp wood, but beneath it, something heavier lingered, an almost imperceptible scent of something old, metallic, and cold. I hesitated at the threshold of the storage room. The door was slightly ajar. A thin crack, but enough. Inside, Farhan stood perfectly still. His hands pressed flat against the wall. He didn't move. He didn't breathe in the way humans do. I froze. The beam of the flashlight trembled in my hand. Light fell across his face. Blank. Empty. Not sleeping. Not thinking. Just present in a way that was terrifyingly absent. Hiba hid behind me, peeking out, her small voice shaking. "Mama, it's near him again." I swallowed, trying to summon a rational explanation. But my heart pounded too fast, my hands shook too hard. And in the storm-dark room, with the walls echoing with the wind, I understood, whatever lived here had made him its vessel, its host, waiting in the silence between raindrops. I stepped forward slowly, the flashlight shaking slightly as the storm rattled the windows. The floor creaked beneath my weight, and the sound seemed impossibly loud. Farhan didn't move. His head was tilted slightly, listening, aware of something invisible. I could feel Hiba trembling beside me, small and silent. Her eyes darted toward the shadows of the room, where the corners seemed to lean closer, as if watching. The beam of the flashlight caught the stacks of old boxes. They had been there for years, broken and dusty. But now, their shadows seemed deeper, like they held secrets we hadn't imagined. I whispered his name. Farhan. Nothing. I tried again. Farhan, it's me. Mariam. Still, nothing. His hands didn't move. His eyes didn't blink. The room felt alive in a way it never had before. Hiba whispered, almost to herself. It's behind him, listening. I swallowed hard. The air felt thick, heavy, almost wet with presence. I could sense it now, the thing that had been lurking, waiting. The thing that spoke only to him. And I realized, with a cold certainty, that the house was no longer ours alone. I moved closer, careful, deliberate. The beam of light cut across his face again. Empty. Absent. I reached a hand toward him, stopping just short of touching his shoulder. The hair on my arm stood on end. Then I saw it, subtle, in the corner of my vision. A flicker of darkness, shifting behind him. Not a shadow cast by light, but something that moved on its own. Hiba tugged at my sleeve. Mama, it's near him. I can feel it. My throat tightened. I wanted to step back, to retreat into the safe light of the living room. But I couldn't. Whatever had been waiting, patient, in our home, was not waiting anymore. It had found its conduit. And it was awake. I whispered his name again, this time louder, but there was no recognition. No response. Just the sound of the storm outside. The creak of the floor. And the faint, almost imperceptible hum in the air. Hiba pressed herself closer to me, shivering. Her small hand gripped mine tightly. I realized we were witnessing something beyond ordinary fear. Something that had existed quietly, hidden, until tonight. And it had chosen him. I stepped back, flashlight trembling, and Hiba clung to me, whispering. Mama, it wants me next. The wind rattled the windows, and rain fell like cold glass against the siding. Farhan remained, still and empty, listening to a presence I could neither see nor name. I held Hiba close, heart hammering, feeling the walls of the house press in around us. The storm outside seemed small compared to what lived inside. The storage room door creaked again, as if sighing. The shadows shifted, waiting for the next move, patient and unrelenting. I understood then, this was no longer just our home. Something had come in with him. And whatever it wasn't going anywhere. Hiba buried her face in my chest. And I stayed frozen, listening to the storm, the dark, and the thing that had made its presence known. The flashlight's beam wavered across the walls, slicing through shadows that clung to corners like cobwebs. Rain tapped against the windows, soft but insistent, a quiet percussion that made the house seem alive. Farhan stood in the center of the living room, face pale, eyes wide, unblinking. I felt my chest tighten as I stepped closer, the beam illuminating the small tremor in his hands. Mama, Hiba whispered behind me, her voice so quiet I almost missed it. But there was no time for reassurance. The air was thick, heavy, and I knew the truth of the storm outside had nothing on the storm within these walls. I squared my shoulders. Tonight, I needed answers. Tonight, I would confront him. I raised my voice slightly, trying to steady the shaking in my chest. Farhan, what have you been doing? What's happening at night? The beam of light fell across his face again. Blank. Confused. Then, trembling. He staggered back, almost collapsing onto the sofa. I don't remember, he said, voice cracking. I just feel watched, even inside my own skin. I wake, and it's like someone else is there, breathing me. My hands shook, and Hiba pressed closer, her small warmth a fragile tether to reality. I could feel the weight of weeks of terror, sleepless nights, whispered warnings, all converging in this moment. The house seemed to lean in, listening, the walls humming with anticipation. I stepped closer, voice softening but firm. You have to tell me. What's following you? What happened after that call? Farhan closed his eyes, shaking his head. It started weeks ago. After that late-night work call. I don't know how it came, but it's here now. I feel it all the time. Watching, waiting. His admission hit me like ice. Not just fear, but inevitability. The danger wasn't something we could fight by locking doors or hiding in rooms. It had already arrived. I moved closer, the beam illuminating every line in his face. His hands pressed to his temples, as if to hold himself together. I can't, he whispered, voice breaking. I can't stop it, it follows me, even when I'm awake. The air in the room thickened. The flashlight flickered, shadows stretching, twisting along the walls. Hiba's hand slipped into mine, small and trembling. I can feel it, Mama, she said softly. I could almost feel it myself, something intangible brushing against the edges of my awareness. Cold. Patient. Waiting. He sank to the floor, knees trembling, arms around his head. I thought I was imagining it, thinking it was stress. But it's not me anymore. I don't know. I don't remember what I do at night. Only the feeling of something else. Inside, outside, everywhere. My throat burned. Fear, anger, grief, all tangled together. The man I loved, the man I knew, was a vessel now, a host for something I could not see. And yet, even in his fear, there was a fragility, a vulnerability that made me ache. The storm outside pounded harder against the windows, echoing the chaos within. The house seemed to breathe with him, moving, alive, haunted. A sudden gust of wind swept through the house, rattling the windows and doors. I could feel the cold spiral around us, cutting through the warmth of the living room, whispering through the cracks in the walls. Farhan trembled violently, shaking his head. It followed me, after the call, it clung to me. I don't know how or why. Hiba pressed her small body closer to me. Mama, it's here, she whispered. Her voice barely audible, but it carried weight. I looked at him, really looked, and saw not a threat, but a man consumed, lost in a presence he could not fight. I'm a victim too, he said softly, voice breaking. The nights, the voices. I can't control it. The room seemed to shift with him, shadows twisting along the walls. The cold gust seemed purposeful, deliberate, and my stomach dropped. If he was the victim, then what had been following him? What kind of presence had the power to creep so silently, infiltrating someone's body, mind, and home? Hiba whimpered softly, nails digging into my sleeve. I realized the danger was no longer abstract, no longer something distant. It was here. It was inside our home. And it had chosen him first, but now, we were all within its reach. The flashlight flickered again, shadows bending toward the corners, as if waiting for my next move. I swallowed hard, the weight of helplessness settling over me. I knelt beside him, holding his trembling hands in mine. The storm outside thundered, but inside, the silence of dread was deafening. I don't know how to stop it, he whispered, voice hoarse. I only know, it's here, and I don't know when it will leave. Hiba pressed herself against my side, small and fragile, whispering. Mama, it wants me next. The air was thick, cold, and heavy with presence. I felt the walls close in, the shadows inching closer, patient and deliberate. I realized then the truth, this wasn't just about Farhan. Whatever had followed him, had followed all of us, quietly, patiently. I gripped Hiba's hand tighter. And I knew the confrontation had only begun. The real threat was still waiting. And tonight, the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm inside our home. The house was quiet, but the silence felt deliberate, like it was holding its breath. Rain had slowed to a soft drizzle, and the windows fogged with the chill inside. Farhan slept in the living room, curled under a blanket that seemed too small for him. I watched from the doorway, heart hammering, every instinct taut. Then I saw it. A shape, impossibly tall, dark as the absence of light, leaning over him. It moved almost like a shadow with a body, still, deliberate, waiting. I froze. And then, slowly, impossibly, it turned its head toward me. Not a flick of the neck, a full, unnatural rotation, precise, deliberate. I swallowed, and in that instant, I knew, this was the thing Hiba had seen all along. Hiba's small hand slipped into mine. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her wide eyes mirrored everything I was feeling. I could hear my own breathing, loud in the quiet of the room. The air felt thicker, colder, as if the walls themselves had exhaled something ancient. I thought about every warning, every whisper, every drawing Hiba had made. Everything she had tried to tell me, and how I had hesitated. Now, hesitation was no longer an option. The shadow didn't move toward me, yet the weight of it pressed down like gravity. I could feel it leaning in, a presence that didn't belong to the living, didn't belong to this world. Hiba pressed herself closer, and in that tiny body, I saw fear and trust and hope all tangled together. She had known something I had only glimpsed in nightmares. And I had to protect her. My pulse drummed in my ears. Every instinct screamed to move, to run, but my feet were rooted to the floor. The shadow's eyes, or whatever counted as eyes, were fixed on Farhan, silent, patient. And I understood, suddenly, what had been following us all along. The shadow leaned closer, its elongated form almost brushing Farhan's shoulder. I wanted to scream, to throw myself between them, but my body moved slowly, deliberately, as if rehearsed in some dream I had never lived. I knelt beside Hiba, whispering, "I'm here. I'm not leaving you." Her hand gripped mine so tightly my fingers ached. The shadow seemed to sense it, pausing for a fraction, tilting its head in something like curiosity. Farhan shifted in his sleep, murmuring incoherent words, but he didn't wake. The thing, the presence, was not violent yet, but its patience was a kind of threat I could feel through every nerve in my body. I tried to focus on Hiba's small, steady heartbeat. She had been right. All along. And the reality of it, of what had haunted our nights, the whispers, the unexplainable drawings, crashed into me. It moved with deliberate slowness, leaning just over him, whispering something I couldn't hear but could feel vibrating through the air. A shiver ran down my spine. I realized then that this was not about me. This was about her. And for the first time, fear transformed into a quiet, fierce resolve. I grabbed Hiba in one motion, pulling her close against my chest. Her small body trembled, but she didn't struggle. She trusted me in that moment. The shadow froze, as if noticing the shift, then slowly retreated, its form stretching back toward the darkness of the hallway. I could feel the chill it left behind, heavy in the air, curling around my throat and lungs. A message lingered in the cold, almost like words written in frost, "Protect her." Hiba clung to me, whispering, "Mama, it's gone, for now." I held her tighter, feeling something inside me snap, not fear, but determination. I realized then that whatever had haunted us, whatever had been patient, watching, waiting, it had never been after me. It had been after Hiba. I looked at Farhan, still asleep, unaware, untouched. The man I had feared for weeks was merely collateral, a host, a vessel. The true danger had always been her. I pressed a kiss to Hiba's hair and whispered a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. "I will never let it take you." The shadow had gone, but the echo of it lingered. The house felt hollow in a new way, as if it had exhaled something unspeakable and left the memory behind. Hiba's small hands pressed against my chest. I held her, listening to the quiet rain, letting it wash over us, letting the storm outside mirror the storm that had passed inside. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Or the night after. But I knew this, I would not leave her side. The flashlight flickered once more, then steadied. I looked at the camera, or, if not a camera, at the space where you're listening, and whispered softly. Sometimes the things that haunt us are not after us, they're after the ones we love most. If you felt the chill with us tonight, subscribe, and stay with me. There are more stories waiting in the dark, and Hiba's story is just one of many.